Could one of you speak to the strong mayor, like Alan, you had talked to me about the strong mayor role in government in Indiana that's different than it is in other states, or maybe different than in other states?
Well, Indiana is referred to as a, quote, strong mayor state. In most states, the mayor is more ceremonial in nature than it is really administrative. In Indiana, mayors of cities generally serve as the business manager of those cities. We don't hire city managers to do what a lot of the mayors are doing, so we very, very much serve in the capacity of the owner of a business, the manager of a business, a CEO, and that kind of thing. It's not just going and kissing babies and cutting ribbons at planned openings and things like that. We're actually administering the business of the city. You want to clarify that?
We should be moving on right now, but to questions from the audience. But I'm going to do one more. What levels of taxation exist in local government, and who and how are the proceeds allocated? It's a really good question.
Well, it varies from city to city, but as a general rule, in most cities, I think, about half of their income comes from property taxes. That's the case for us. About half of it is property taxes. About 20% of it is income taxes. That's county adjusted gross income tax and your edit tax together. The city does not decide how much income tax can be passed. That's only a county council function in Elkhart County. And you can never ask a question, short question, and get a short answer. All of these local option income taxes that you're reading about in the newspaper, you read about South Bend and what they're doing in Mishawaka, St. Joe County. There's a difference in types of counties and income taxes. St. Joe County is what's called a COIT county, county option income tax. And in a COIT county, the legislative, excuse me, the legislative bodies of the majority of the population determine whether there's an income tax and a wheel tax in the case of St. Joe County. So they've got 3 legislative bodies that any 2 of them constitute over 50% of the population. So any 2 of South Bend, Mishawaka, or St. Joe County can decide if they have an option income tax. So the cities have a big influence on whether there can be an income tax in St. Joe County. In Elkhart County, we're a Cadgett County, county adjusted gross income tax, and only the county council can decide if there is an income tax. So if the cities are in distress but the county's not, guess what happens? You know, there's no income tax. So that, and then, so I said 20%, 50%, so about 30% of our income comes from things like ambulance fees, cemetery fees, building department fees, planning fees, and all those kind of things.
I was trying to write down all the taxes. We have property, Cadgett, edit, street and road, cigarette, city tax, will tax, riverboat tax, ambulance fees. So there are a lot of different tax entities that we receive income, but property tax probably being our biggest.
Yeah.
And
what I'm property tax. Because it's an assessor, that's a township function, that's capped by the state, that's enacted by the city.
Okay, to start this, I got to go back to before some of you were born, okay, to 1972, okay. Before 1972, local communities completely determined property taxes. You create a budget, you decide how much money you want to spend. It's relatively easy to figure out how property taxes happen. You figure out how much you want to spend, then you add up all your other income, and whatever's left is going to be property taxes. Okay? That's the way it was done before 1972. And it didn't matter how big the budget was, there was going to be enough property tax there to fund it because you just created a rate that got you that much funds. Well, when Governor Bowen was here, he said, you know, property taxes are growing too fast, we need to control them. So at whatever point you were at in 1972 is where you got controlled from. If you happen to have really low property taxes, you still have low property taxes today, and if you had really high ones, you got really, really high property taxes today. Well, it happens that the city of Goshen was frozen at a pretty low level in 1972 because back in those days, and it still happens to some degree, in an election year, coming into an election year, nobody ever wants to show that the tax rate went up. They'd like to show that the tax rate went down, so they do as little as they can for the next year to try to show something good to the taxpayers. Well, in about 1971, the city of Goshen had some excess cash. Actually, Ron Hoke showed me this, okay? He explained this to me. City of Goshen had some cash reserves, so instead of raising more taxes the next year, they decided to spend cash reserves and lower their tax rate. Well, it just so happens that when the tax rate was artificially low is the point it got frozen at, or controlled from. So if you extrapolated it all out today, we'd have about $3 million more today than we have if we hadn't done that in 1971 to try to get reelected, basically. But now the state decides how much total property tax. They don't care what our rate is, okay? Well, they do now with the circuit breaker caps. But before circuit breakers, they didn't care what the rate was. They cared how much money you got. So if Goshen got $12 million one year, you were allowed to increase that $12 million by a percentage that is determined by the state. And the percentage is the rolling average of the last 6 years non-farm personal income in the state of Indiana.
You got that?
So if the average growth in income was 3.4%, you got to raise your $12 million by 3.4%. If incomes are going down, which we may see in the state of Indiana, it trails because it's a 6-year rolling average. But it is not inconceivable that your property tax levy can go down. So they take the $12 million and they say, here's how much more you can spend next year or less. And then however much that is divided by the total assessed value in your community determines your tax rate. So one year it might be 97 cents and one year it might be 98 cents. It varies up and down, and the state doesn't really care about that, except in the future they're not going to allow us to collect more than X percent of your assessed value for property taxes.
Good job.
And the assessor determines how much your property is worth. We never hear from anybody, the assessor never hears from anybody that thinks that their property was assessed too low, but if it's too high. And this is interesting, because I did call my township assessor one day. I have one rental property, and it came in assessed, I think I paid $45,000 for it a number of years ago, and it came in assessed at $40,000. And I didn't want somebody getting a hold of that assessment saying, oh, you must have a cute deal with the assessor because you're the mayor, so you get a low assessment. So I call her up, and the person who answered the phone, I explained what I was doing. I said, you assessed a property, and I think it's assessed too low. And she said, well, does it have 2 units? Yeah, it has 2 units. Does it have 2 bedrooms down one? Yeah, all that stuff's right. I'm just telling you, I wouldn't sell it for what you have it assessed for. I think it's too low. And she said, you must be one of the lucky ones. And I said, I didn't think it was supposed to be the lucky and the unlucky. I thought it was supposed to be market value. And she wouldn't budge. You know, you just must be lucky. So I happened to run into the assessor in the hall one day, and I told her about the conversation. She said, well, I'll go out and look at it. So she went out, and they raised the assessment. I don't think they raised it high enough, but I did my duty. But how many people will call and say, raise my assessment? But those assessments determine how much taxes you're going to pay.
Thank you so much. This is